Hello, good evening, everyone. You're watching the Cheese Room podcast. I am the caller, and I'm joined today by some fantastic guests. So let's go around the room without further ado. Joining me, as ever, is the Harlow Globetrotter. How are you tonight, HG, and how is Austria?
I'm doing well. Austria's fine. Nothing's really changed here. Although I did notice that some of our supermarket shelves aren't as full as they usually are. I don't know what that means, but yeah. No, life is all right. Talking Spurs, as always.
Don't even talk to me about supermarket shortages. It's my specialist subject on Mastermind, running a shop. I'm sick of talking to it. So I'm glad you're feeling some of it in Austria, HG, unless you are taking the piss indeed.
I'm not taking the piss. I'm not taking this that, maybe people would like to buy the same crap. Who knows what it is, but there you go.
There you go. All the way from Brazil, Brandon McGurty. How are you, sir? How is Brazil today?
I'm good.
In the backyard, isn't there?
Yeah, it sounds like it, and hopefully you guys can't hear it. But yeah, it's a national holiday in Brazil today, and it's also Day of Children, Dia das Crianças. So there's all these activities going on outside for the kids, and the owners of the land next door are having a party. So I'm here with you guys, and there's no place I'd rather be.
Well, absolutely. Who would want to be at a carnival when you could be in the cheese room with the Trust? So welcome the Trust. Rachel, first of all, we've had you on the pod lots of times. Great to have you back on this evening. How are you? And do you want to sort of tell us a bit about yourself and what the Trust do for people who may not have already listened to the pods and may not be familiar with your work?
Sure. Oh, it's great to be invited back. Thank you. And it's lovely to be able to be back. And I'm very well. I'm just recovering from a flu jab because obviously we've all got to be double vaxxed and flu jabbed this winter. So I've just done mine, just taken a paracetamol, and I have anaesthetic here as well. So in terms of the Trust, I've been on the board for, I think it's 4 years of the Trust, and I've been a member for about 6 or 7. The Trust is something that has a huge impact on the way that supporters can experience the club. So really our role is to work tirelessly. We're all volunteers, we're all democratically elected, it's formally constituted. But basically our role is to communicate with the club, to act as a conduit, to make sure that they are aware of supporters and that they have got supporters in mind at every decision that's made. So that can be at a board level, the big decisions. So, for example, one of our recent achievements, which we're thrilled about, is that we're going to be piloting safe standing. That's something we've fought for as a Trust for about 8 years. Mm-hmm. We did a presentation to the club, and it sort of rolled slowly but relentlessly from there. And it was built into the stadium, as you know. The stadium was safe standing ready, and that's all because of the sort of work that we do with them. Also, we work on lots and lots of day-to-day issues. So ticketing is a huge one. We're always trying to make sure that there's good ticket pricing, and we lobbied hard to get the package in place for the Europa Conference tickets, because obviously, well, it's the right thing to do. We also want a new generation of fans to be able to come. So by having much more affordable seats, it's wonderful. I love going to those games actually, because it's the kids on the pitch and it's the kids off the pitch, and the atmosphere is fantastic. And they did listen to us, and they did do a better than expected price package on that. And we work with my role, for example, is particularly to do with catering, and I meet with the club and we talk about the price of beer, and we lobbied really hard, pushing on an open door, I have to say, to get craft beers in the stadium, and to not just have I won't mention any name. I'll leave that to you.
Yeah. I'm familiar with beer, Rachel. It's a specialist topic for me.
But we've got our own brewery, haven't we, in the stadium, and things like this, which we're really proud of. But we constantly give feedback, so that and they are very receptive on those sort of things. And also we do a lot of safety work. So we work with the stewards on the SAG, the safety committee. We work to make sure that the voice of the local community is heard as well. So it's not acceptable to just say, well, you bought a house, we were here first. When the local community moved in, it wasn't a 60,000 stadium. There weren't NFL matches, there weren't boxing matches, there weren't thousands and thousands of people leaving at 11 o'clock at night. So we need to make sure that their voice is heard. And we also do a lot of work with charities, with sustainable transport, cycling, cycle on new spurs, and lots of things like that.
Fantastic. And welcome to Pete, also a big part of the trust. Pete, if you could tell us a bit about what your role is within the trust and the kind of work you do.
Yeah, sure. I'm basically the company secretary. So the main duties of the secretary is to make sure that we do everything by the rules that we operate under, and that we furnish certain information to the regulator, which is the Financial Conduct Association, on a regular basis, so that any changes to our rules have to go through them to be approved. We have to submit accounts every year, which are published on the website. So that's the main job, apart from the normal role of a secretary to minute, arrange meetings, etc., etc. But also I specialise in community and the charitable elements of what the trust does. Rachel's already mentioned Cycle on New Spurs that have been going for about 8 years, I think it is now, and they raise funds for Prostate Cancer UK. One of the things that I did when I first joined in, I think it was about 2017, was to try and adopt a local charity, and we found a charity called Studio 306, who try to get people with mental health issues back into an artistic framework, i.e. making things to sell. So we promote that charity and support them financially as well. And more recently, we've been helping the local food bank by firstly raising a large amount of funds, over £50,000, just before Christmas before last. And we're now collaborating with the football club on a text giving service, and also on match days a drop-off service, so that if people are attending the game, they can bring certain foods that the food bank is short of and drop them off with the community food bank van, which is parked in the community centre directly opposite the ground. On match days, normally they're from between 1 and 3 hours before kickoff. So that's my role. I've been a season ticket holder on and off at Tottenham since 1969. So one of the elements that I've been involved in as well heavily is the community angle that Rachel spoke about. When the club started planning the new stadium, they realised and recognised that they needed to have the local community on board. So they set up a group which meets every month and has done for the past 6 years, I think it is now, called Business and Community Liaison. And that's where representatives from the club and MACE, when they were building the stadium, and the local authority and local councillors and local housing reps and business reps could all meet on a regular basis to discuss the issues that they were all coming across during the build of the stadium, but also once the stadium was opened, how it was then developed. And for example, issues with on-street parking, issues with transportation, issues with the rubbish that a crowd inevitably leaves behind. So all of those issues have been addressed, and it's not always to the satisfaction of the local community, but I think it was a highlight. One of the local residents that I got to know quite well over the past few years said after the boxing match, it made us realise how good the football supporters are. Yeah, all sorts of issues with people parking, urinating in streets, in front doorways, really antisocial behaviour. So much so that I understand the club are thinking twice about whether they hold an event like that again. So that's the community angle. We reach out. We also, as a trust, have shares in a local community pub that we frequent and have used in the past for events, quiz nights, end of season socials, where we had a quiz night where the club put a team in, and Ledley King was one of the guests. It's quite interesting because it was funny because Rachel did a picture round and he struggled with some of the pictures. He couldn't recognise his teammates.
I was absolutely thrilled because he tweeted a section of it, which was a picture of Luka Modric as a child. And he said, can anyone else tell what this is? You know, who this was? He was cheating, basically. But it was so lovely because he stayed for the whole night. You know, it wasn't like someone who just sort of swans in, signs a few autographs and off he goes. He stayed for the whole night and really joined in, and it was fantastic. He didn't recognise Oliver Skip either.
Yeah, and his birthday today, no less.
It is.
Yeah, exactly.
Birthday letters.
41, I want to say. 41, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, happy birthday, Ledley. There you go, raise a glass.
Yes.
What we got there?
Absolutely.
Oh, look, that looks exciting. Is that a gin?
It could be. I couldn't possibly comment.
Cheers.
Good stuff. Well, we've got loads to get through tonight. So if you're watching, do drop your questions in the comment box. We'll try to get to as many as possible. We've pre-taken some before this event. Brendan, do you want to go with the first question? Let's get involved.
Sure. Yeah, I guess from the trust side and from the podcast side, it's the first time we've welcomed you on post-COVID, I think. So I just want to sort of see what your thoughts are in terms of fans coming back into the stadium. Obviously, it's great. We had a great time at the City game, Rachel. Do you think it's been managed well, the return? Have there been any issues from that members have mentioned to you on the return of fans to the stadium?
I think I would say generally, yes, I do actually. I think it's been managed really well. And statistically, I was reading something today where it was saying that there really hasn't been peaks around football stadia. So COVID really isn't getting spread particularly. Obviously, it's outside, which helps. But I think the main thing that's caused difficulties for people is the fact that because the club they have to adhere to what the government are telling them to do. They have to know who is in the stadium. They can't leave it like it used to be that this is your season ticket. If you're letting your mate come, we don't need to know. They have to know who's in there. And so they've moved to a completely digital process. And as with so many things, people forget that there are a lot of people who don't use mobile phones, or they don't have mobile phones that are smartphones. I even know a couple of people who've got, believe it or not, mobile phones where it's just a phone. Yeah. And it does cause huge problems. And some of the games, there was one game in particular where people were really rightly upset because they couldn't download the pass to their phones. There were massive queues at the ticket office. There was only like 5 windows open, even though it's the largest ticket office in the world, apparently, or somewhere largest, maybe in England. But yeah, so those sort of things have caused problems. But we've worked really closely with the club, and they've never been a problem more than once. And I have to say also things like the late issuing of away tickets is not the club's fault. It's the problem of the club, who's the home ground. And our ticket office has been answering emails and meeting with fans at the ground with tickets where necessary. So those sort of few problems that have arisen, it's not acceptable when they do, but they are addressed, and we are very actively involved in those.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest difficulties has been, technophobes getting used to technology. The system's slightly different if you have an Apple phone or if you have an Android. I've got an Apple, so my season ticket pass gets downloaded directly into my wallet. I need to show that ticket at the foot of the staircases around the ground. So it's a 3-process check. So then firstly, make sure you're going up the right staircase to get to the right turnstile. Then you go through an aircraft type scanner. And at that stage, there's a spot check for your COVID passport, which is the record that you've been double vaxxed and also holds your lateral flow test or PCR tests, which is a requirement of entry for the stadium. So that is a spot check. The very first friendly we had at the start of the season against Arsenal, that was, I think, around about 25,000 people. And it wasn't a spot check. Everybody's passport was checked, and they very soon realised that was a logistical nightmare. So they've now said, we'll do a spot check. And that worked a little better for City, and I think people have now become a little bit more used to that. So that's the second phase. And then the third phase is you actually operate the turnstile with your phone, stick it on the top, and bang, you're in. So that process does seem to be working well. I think, as I say, with some teething problems with downloading tickets into Android phones has caused the problem. I think that has been resolved. But once in the stadium, the surrounds, I won't say mask wearing is 100%. It's probably nowhere near it. I think it's probably about 50% in the closed areas.
Not even that.
No.
Maybe.
I would have said 15.
Yeah, right. Maybe they're a little.
Depends where we are.
Yeah, maybe they're a little bit more better around where I sit. But so those sorts of angles, I think people have got used to. I think once you're actually in the bowl, you forget about all of that. I certainly do. After the first game, and just get over it, and almost, I say, life is back to normal as far as once you're actually in the stadium is concerned.
Yeah, we are having to work on something with the club, though, which is the difficulty around season ticket holders who are then trying to do the right thing if they get pinged. And we're having to work really hard to get the club to honour, if they can't then sell them on the ticket exchange or swap them. That's an issue, because otherwise it's sort of encouraging people to not honour the pinging system.
Yeah, it happened to me actually. I missed a game because I got COVID. I think I just gave my ticket away, but it's through
ticket share, obviously.
Yeah, forwarded it to a friend. Yeah. Well,
we're glad you're much better anyway.
Much better, but slightly chesty, to be honest.
No.
I need this rum and coke to help me out.
Don't give him any attention. He doesn't need the attention. He's fine. All right. He's doing the show. He's fine.
Absolutely fine. HG, your question.
Well, okay. Well, so the question that we have next, actually from David, who you know from the show, the guy in Australia. He says, I'm Enoch out and a member of the trust. I think you do a great job, and it's a disgrace that anyone should choose to abuse volunteers. But his question was, well, what was your objective in requesting the recent meeting with the club board that was refused?
Right. Shall I take that one?
Yeah, you go, Rush.
So, well, yes, we did request a meeting, and it was refused. I would say that we had a meeting with the club before, that they requested, and that was about their plans for greater fan involvement. So this was after the ESL debacle, and before the fan-led review evidence was given. So they asked to see us and tell us about their groundbreaking proposals, which we weren't as enthusiastic about as they were, because basically we didn't see that it had any teeth. And it's very easy to say, oh, we've got a fan on the board, but then just outvote them on everything that matters. So we requested a meeting. I mean, as a board, we normally have 3 meetings a year with the executive board of Spurs. We asked to have a meeting, and we were obviously disappointed that it was turned down. The meeting was not a knee-jerk meeting. We've been asking the club for 2 years to talk us through what their vision is for the club, what their objectives are, what their key performance indicators would be, whether they consider that we are on track in terms of success on the pitch. We wanted to know the relationship between the money that's being raised through the stadium and where that's going, and whether that could reassure fans that it's going to be, it all stays within the club and is going to be benefiting the club. So there were a lot of questions, but we asked when Pochettino was sacked, for example, we asked then about what is the vision, because Mourinho doesn't feel like the Spurs vision to us, but they didn't answer. We've asked again several times for answers, like, for example, when they didn't do any transfers for 18 months. That cannot be right. And to me, that is when it all started to go downhill, because everyone got exhausted, and you've got to keep refreshing. So really, this was just a continuation of that dialogue that we wanted to have. And we have sat in board meetings with the executive board. We'd heard rumours about the European Super League. We sat and asked them, and they basically lied, and told us just barefaced lies. So we can't see the point in having any meetings that we can't have complete transparency in, and where we can't report back to members. And I'm just going to quickly chip in that the meeting that we didn't have with the club around the European Super League, we didn't just say, we don't want to meet with you. Of course not. We wanted to meet with them. But they didn't want us to report on what they said. They said, we'll talk to you, but it's got to be confidential. NDA. We're a member organisation, and anything they say to us, we publish. We publish the minutes of all the meetings, and we gave them the opportunity to give us a written statement if they didn't want to meet with us on that basis, that we would then read to our members at our member meeting, and they declined. So this is a sort of an ongoing situation where we're trying to get some clarity, that we can then reassure Spurs supporters about, and give them, so we're actually offering them the chance to really explain what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that we face in our discussions with the club board is the fact we don't always get a really true picture of exactly, or a true response to the questions that we're asking. So we have to either read between the lines or take what we're told with a pinch of salt. And with that sort of relationship, there's a real question about, have we any real power at all in influencing decisions by the club? And under the current arrangements, the honest answer to that is yes, at a very low level, but very little influence whatsoever. Do they listen to us? Yes, I think they do listen to us, but do they then follow some of our suggestions? It's rare at a higher level. The fan-led review, we are hoping, will actually give some teeth and hopefully give fan representation, a much higher profile, and also a much higher say in some key decisions. Now, we would never be expected to be consulted on who the new manager should be. We would never expected to sort of say to Enoch, we think you ought to sell to X or Y or Z, or we don't think you ought to sell to X or Y or Z. They're not the level of questions or answers that we would be involved, decisions that we would be involved in. But this golden share that has been mentioned, I think, several times before, where there's a key process in a decision making. For example, a new owner comes into Tottenham and says, my favourite colour is red. Team are going to play in red. If you recall, there was a similar sort of issue to that at Cardiff a few years ago, where the new owner come in and wanted to change their shirts from blue to red. Now, that I would expect a fan representative to be able to veto and say, no, that goes to the culture of the club, to the ethos of the club. You cannot do that. Similarly, the key question or the key issue for me at the moment is, how can a fan representative stop my club joining the ESL or ESL2? And whatever process is put in place through the fan-led review, if you can't actually stop that happening, then there's no power to a supporters trust in any way, shape or form. And that's not just about Tottenham, that's about every Football League club and Premiership club. So it's that angle that really does concern me. You know, it does need, whatever the conclusions of the fan-led review are, they need to be teethed to ensure that fans do have a realistic say in the running of their club.
Sorry, Brandon, you were going to say something.
Yeah, apologies for the background noise here. Did the club give an explanation as to why they refused the meeting? Did they suggest future dates? Was there any, or was it just a flat no? That was one of the questions from Ed Johnson from our Facebook group.
Yeah, it's funny because the club said, they've said publicly, there's an open door. We'd love, you know, that we will always be welcome.
Yeah.
You know, we'll always welcome not visits. I'm sure they wouldn't welcome a visit, but they would welcome meetings with the trust board, except they weren't. They didn't welcome one at all. And basically it took a long time to get any response. And eventually it was just, no. We didn't think you were interested in on-field matters. You know, we hadn't even asked them. We hadn't even told them what particularly we were asking about, other than what I've just said, which is so much more than, you know, who's going to be playing. What are we going to do with Harry Kane? No, and they didn't offer any other way. No, they didn't offer a written response or anything. No. So
they believed that it was essentially that you were reacting to the fact that we'd just lost 3 on the spin, and that was why you called me. They honestly thought that you operated like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the annoying thing is they've known us and the way they operate for a long, long time. So I find it hard to believe that they really believe that.
Excuse for them from them, I'm assuming.
I think so.
Can I just say, like, I think Rachel said earlier, something along the lines of the club has an idea of where they want, or what they want the fan representation to look like. Maybe I was wrong in hearing that, but I think I heard that. Are you at liberty to say what they thought that might be, or how? Because obviously, I mean, they're waiting for the government, we're waiting for the government, but I would imagine. I mean, when I read their statement saying that, you know, they have this in mind, I don't think I'm silly. I think I can understand that they want what they want, and that's it, really. But do we have any idea of what it is they might be proposing for this fan representation?
I mean, yes, we'd had a meeting with them. Must have been, was it about 3 months ago, probably? And it was pretty much, we want a fan, independent fan on the board, but basically with a fan advisory panel, and it would be made up of different constitutional parts. mainly sort of Spurs-related organisations that work well with the club, which they do, but they're very particularly interested in a particular faction of the supporters, and that they might find a role for us in there somewhere. But of course, we're the only ones that are a formal constituted organisation that represents all supporters. We're non-factional.
So at the risk of being devil's advocate for a second, let's say there are 5, 6, 7 groups that Spurs work with, that the club work with. They would say, hey, you can nominate one person from this to be on the panel, and then from that panel, the 7 of you would decide who the one representative is. Is that a decent understanding of the situation?
I think Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was along those lines. But just to go back at you there, HG, you're talking about a trust that represents over 22,000 people, and organisations who represent very, very much smaller numbers, but work very closely with the club. They're fantastic organisations, but it just doesn't make any sense that that our influence would go from all the work that we've done, all the knowledge that we've got across so many work streams and years of experience, would suddenly go down to being one of 7.
This is I personally agree with you completely. To me, I mean, I'm not involved in any of these things. I'll say that now. To me, that the trust is clearly the biggest organisation that has any relationship with the club. For them to kind of decide or to hope that there's going to be some kind of panel, to me, it should be someone from the want to build a relationship with the fans, and not just the fans who are members of the trust. I'm not a member of the trust, but I believe in doing. I just feel that from a logical standpoint, it would make sense. And so it's weird for me that they would come out and say, well, there's a group of people and there's a panel. I think it should be the trust. It was just surprising to me that that I don't know, maybe I'm a cynic, but it feels as if they're trying to.
I don't think you're a cynic. I have to say that we aren't arguing that it should just be us. We welcome other perspectives. I think that's really healthy. But it wouldn't make sense for it to be 5 organisations, one massive one, 4 smaller ones, for example, and have one person from each. There would need to be a different balance. But the main problem is the lack of accountability, the lack of teeth that such an organisation, such a structure would have. So we're looking to the.
Sorry, but what you're telling me is that Cooler has. You're telling me that Cooler has a chance of being that fan representation. No, that's it.
I'm certainly not here to dash anyone's hopes.
I agree with Daniel on everything and really disappoint everyone. Yeah,
certainly the club look to organisations that under their umbrella, like all of their supporters clubs, obviously overseas supporters clubs as well. Spurs Ability, who represent those less able, Proud Lily Whites, who clearly have a specific niche, as do Spurs Ability. And the trust is a different animal to those bodies because we're not happy clappers. Supporters clubs, by their definition, are full of supporters. Now, I know the trust are supporters and we're fans, but we take a more holistic approach in trying to get the club to justify some of the decisions that they're making. They're clearly not going to get everything right, but when certain decisions are made, like the ESL, that strikes me as I can understand why the club thought they wanted to do it because for the purely financial reasons, but to completely disregard and not even consider what the fans' reaction to that would be. I can recall actually sitting across the table from Daniel, and when the question was raised, he said, "I'm a fan. most of the board are fans as well. We know what fans think. We have friends who are fans as well. Trust us to make the right decision. And that, to slightly paraphrases what he said, but that was the gist of what he said to us.
Yeah.
And then to find quite clearly that, well, sorry, Daniel, you're wrong. You really don't know what fans think. You really haven't taken the wider perspective of the impact on the pyramid, the impact on, do I really get enthused about playing Barcelona twice a year for the next 24 years without any jeopardy? It'd be nice after 2 or 3 visits to Barcelona, but that would probably pale after a while. And I'd like to go to Rennes or Mura or Vitesse Arnhem. That was a real eye-opener for me when, you know, we sat across the table and he said that, and then the subsequent occurrence of the ESL, where clearly if there was a fan representative, whether it be a trust member or whether it would be someone from Proud Lily Whites or one of the supporters groups, who would actually probably all sit up and say, if you're discussing that, hold on, have you thought about X and Y and Z, and have you thought about the impact on the Football League? Whether it would have made any difference in their thinking, I doubt, because I think it was mainly financially driven. But I may be wrong on that count. I can't think of any other reason that any club would go for that ESL prospect.
But that's why the proposal that we're making is that there would be a golden vote on those kind of issues, closed competition being one of them, changing leagues, changing kit. You know, it's got to have teeth.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question coming from Bobspur. This is something I've seen a lot over media, and I'm sure you have too. I don't even know if there's any truth in this no statue policy. Maybe you guys could shed some light on it. But has this been discussed at all with the club? I guess not if they're meeting with you, but what could I ask your view on it?
Certainly the club, well, let's go backwards. You will know probably that there's the intention that there will be a museum as part of the stadium in Warrington House. That has been delayed through COVID and through financial reasons as well. But it was always the intention that that would contain the memorials to, for example, the Bill Nicholson gates, which are in storage at the moment, will form part of that museum exhibition. And I know for a fact, because I was part of a consultation group on how that museum should be created, when we met with consultants, a lot of Spurs fans were invited to sit across the table and come up with loads of ideas about what a museum should contain. And certainly the philosophy was that if we're talking about statues, and for example, wouldn't it be lovely to have a statue of a lamppost with Bobby Buckle and his 2 mates standing underneath it, you know, discussing, oh, should we start a football team? You know, that would be the ideal place for it. So it was always in the club's mind that that's where those tributes would be made. They would not name stands and they would not have street furniture. So the policy does exist, or did exist. Whether the club are now rethinking that because the museum is some way down the line, it certainly won't be this year, 2022 at the earliest. I think in the last meeting we had, it was discussed and the club said, well, it'd be very difficult for us to justify spending money on opening that museum given the current climate. Which is understandable, is probably more important, the things that the club would need to spend money on. Although for someone who's very keen on the heritage and the history of the club, one of the things I do outside of the trust is run local history walks around the various grounds and stadia or places where we have played football since 1882. So I'm more than keen to see that history being recognised. It is annoying, I think, you know, with the recent unhappy death of Jimmy Greaves and the call for statues or naming stadia and all that sort of, or naming stands. You know, that isn't in the club's thinking. Now, whether they might change that philosophy over a period of time, they clearly want a stadium bowl, as seen from the NFL at the weekend, that can be adapted for any sport, or for boxing, or for stadium events like rock concerts. So from that angle, I can understand there's only two visible elements in that stadium on NFL Day that actually ties it as the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and that's the Cockerel, clearly up on the Skywalk, and the one that's etched into the concrete in front of Daniel Levy's seat. Other than that, everything is electronic, and can be, sort of changed depending on the circumstances. And, with the NFL, one thing, I'm not into NFL, and I did watch a little bit of on Sunday, and, they put red wraps, I think, at one end where one of the teams played in red. Couldn't tell you which one it was, and that offended me immediately. A bit of red in our stadium, how dare you? And I'm thinking, well, we're getting a lot of money out of this, so it is.
Sorry, Pete.
Go on, Rich.
I was just going to say also, as a trust, it's been incredibly difficult trying to work with the club on this. But one of our board members, Rob, who's the son of John White, who was in the double team, as I'm sure you know, he's been working really, really hard on some projects where we are trying to get something that is a permanent memorial to Jimmy Greaves, and just as a starting point, which we can't talk about anymore at the moment, but we're not letting it go. We are trying really hard. Okay,
good stuff. Bren, over to you.
Yeah, just Pete actually touched on it, the NFL game at the weekend and the AJ fight and all these sort of extra events that we're getting because we're a multi-use stadium. Yeah. What's your opinion on that? I mean, surely the revenue is a good thing, and as long as it's invested, as Rachel was saying, within the club. Do you understand some fans' sort of frustrations that maybe football isn't the main focus of Tottenham Hotspur Stadium?
I think it's once you design a stadium that's got an Astro NFL pitch and the basement and a grass pitch that can be rolled out on top of it, you're clearly designing it to be multi-use. And going back in the old days of White Hart Lane, it saw many different sporting events, up from, I think there were baseball in 1910 or something like that, when we won, I think, the British Baseball Cup or something. Tottenham did. Beat up
You'll
Woolwich.
never sing that.
No, exactly. We beat Woolwich 17-2 in the semi-final, which is nice. And there's been boxing and there's been concerts there and all sorts of things over the years. Joe Bugner fought there, fought Frank Bruno there. I think there were fights, fought 1942, 1945. So if you're having a stadium nowadays and you're designing a stadium from scratch, you want to maximise its usage. You don't just want it to host 23, 24, 25 football matches a year. You want to use it as much as you possibly can. So I have absolutely no problem with that stadium being used for other things. I think in difficult times, it can be used as a stick to beat the club and the board. They've taken their eye off the ball. They're more focused on getting concerts in, and they're more focused in doing X, Y, and Z. That isn't the case. They're focused to maximise the revenue stream from that stadium in any way they possibly can. We've got coming up Rugby League Challenge Final next year. I think there are some concerts in line. Obviously, boxing, as I mentioned earlier, the club, I think, are going to reconsider that.
I was there, Pete. I was there. I've got to tell you, the biggest issue for me was transport was just diabolical. And that caused a lot of the antisocial behaviour because you release all these drunk people with literally nowhere to go. The train station shut at midnight, but they kept the stadium open late to let people drink in the bars and whatever. So what's going to happen in the end? People are having to walk to Seven Sisters or get a bus, which is not great. I mean, it was carnage. It was absolute carnage. I was walking up the high road at like quarter to one at night. Couldn't get. So I think they could fix that with transport. The transport was just terrible. terrible.
Yeah, but we can get 60,000 people out of the football stadium in relatively good time. All right, maybe not finishing at 11 o'clock at night, but that works. So why didn't it work with boxing? I suspect it's probably unfamiliarity with the area. Everybody trying to get into the nearest station as opposed to walking to Northumberland Park or walking to Seven Sisters or walking to Meridian Water, which is the new station which is open, which is just as close as Northumberland Park and Tottenham Hale. So I think there's probably a little bit of unfamiliarity with that. People not quite knowing where to queue, not quite knowing, or probably not, or might have done some research before the game about thinking how they're going to get home or the fight, and probably maybe having one or two beers and then forgetting what they had planned. Certainly, I mean, the CPZ caused issues. Again, I know local residents who the CPZ finishes at 8:30. So suddenly the whole area gets absolutely flooded with cars. Which basically at that time can park anywhere apart from obviously on double yellows. And that caused all manner of problems to local residents trying to get in and out of their properties. So there are issues. I don't think there are any limits, as far as I know, on how many events they can hold a year. I got no problem with it being used for NFL or for concerts or for boxing, but we have to be mindful it's in the middle of a residential area.
Just to come in on that, Pete, and Rachel, you might be going on to talk about this. I think that, if I may say, I think the issue that I hear most from Spurs fans, and obviously Twitter is not the place to hear sensible talk most of the time, but that what I hear is that people are concerned we're running these events and where does the money go from those events?
Yeah.
And I suppose what they really want to know is it going back into the team? Is it going back into the club? Or are, as I hear a lot of, ENIC lining their own pockets with it? And I suppose that's what if I was to ask a representative question to you, if you know the answer or not, that would be my question.
It's certainly one of the questions that's being asked of us. We're, as far as we can tell from the financial, and we do have financial experts on the board, we see clearly that ENIC or the directors will take the remuneration. I think last year they didn't. I may be wrong on that, but clearly there is money going out of the business to the directors. The financial stream, as far as we can see, so all profit proceeds and profit from drink sales, food sales, merchandise sales within the stadium on NFL Day or boxing or rock concerts will go to the club. Now, to be able to trace the money stream is a little bit more of a challenge, but the evidence that we see is that money does go back into the football club. One of the other questions that we're digging around at the moment, which is a little bit more longer term, is where did the money for all of the various property purchases to, for example, buy the property for the footprint of the new stadium, but also buy property up locally in other areas, and the subsequent development schemes that are in the pipeline, such as the Goods Yard, the old Sainsbury's B&M site, the various developments that are going to take place along Park Lane, the hotel, the Extreme Sports Centre and the housing complexes. Where are the proceeds from those developments? Are they going to go back into the football club? Now, that is a little bit more of a longer term and something that we need to investigate and keep an eye on. And we have, as yet, obviously don't have an answer to that because very few of those, well, none of those developments have actually come to fruition yet, all in planning process. Obviously, COVID has hit the timelines of those, but the intention will be, at some time, there's going to be a steady flow of cash from those developments. So we can't give an honest answer and say, yeah, everything 100% goes back to the football club. We're certainly aware that the food and drink concessions do. And we would need to make sure that we could trace, the money flow from the development side of the business of the football club.
I mean, I think that this is the interesting thing for me is that, like, obviously, I do think the money is staying within the club. The question is, is it going onto more infrastructure, or is it going to the team? And for the people that, I live abroad. I don't have to do this, but the people are paying a lot of money for these tickets.
Yeah.
They're seeing football that isn't as good as it was. I mean, perhaps more like the Tottenham that I grew up with, but still, it's not as good as it was. And we want to get back to where we were. And it's just this understanding of, look, if we're bringing in, this extra money, how, what percentage is going off to pay the interest on the loans? How much is going to be available for the team? Obviously, that means where we are now, that means new players. It doesn't mean wages on people that maybe we don't want. It's just interesting. I understand that from a fan perspective, we will never really know, right? But sometimes it just to see something would be great for fans. I think all these extra events have led to us spending 25 million on an extra player that maybe we didn't have. And it's tough because we know, like, revenue wise, we're a massive club. Yeah. And I just think for when it comes, and I'm sure you will agree with me on this anyway, but the idea of we are a top 10 club in the world when it comes to revenue. We're certainly one of the big six in England. We should be able to compete for players. Weirdly enough, our track record of buying players for lots of money isn't great. But the idea of, like, we're pushing the boat out a little bit. And I remember, we're going back 10 years now when we had that awful summer, the awful winter where Redknapp had just taken over and we went out and bought Palacios and Robbie Keane came back, and it's a long time ago now. But that felt like, we're spending money because we were panicking. Maybe something terrible could happen. And because that level of fear isn't there right now, that maybe the club isn't, they're hedging their bets a little bit. COVID obviously has made life difficult for plenty of people, for the club as well. And I guess as fans who are paying the money week in, week out for tickets that cost an awful lot of money, I guess they just want to see something coming back, some idea that, yes, we are. I mean, I'm preaching to the converted, I know, but the idea of, are we really going to go out and buy someone who's, whether it's proven Premier League or prime of their career, or however you want to phrase it, or are we still scraping around for those? Yeah, sorry.
I suppose we can criticise, many purchases or non-purchases. There'll always be why didn't we buy Grealish when we had the opportunity? Yeah, that goes without saying. Fernandez. I mean, the fact that I know that Grealish was within seconds of signing that contract, doesn't fill me with any pleasure at all. But it was that close. He's admitted that himself. Whether he did it publicly, he certainly has done it privately. And whether some of our purchases, for example, the last transfer window, some of those are longer term. Galini, for example, is a longer term potential replacement for Hugo. The young lad we bought from France and lent back sounds like a superb prospect. But again, we've had many superb prospects in the past. So I think there's some optimism. They're still spending money, but they're still spending money on infrastructure as well. Recently with the purchase of the golf course next to Hotspur Way, to increase the footprint of the training facility there. I can't think of any other infrastructure purchases that they would need to make in the next 10, 15 years. Once the golf course, I think partly the idea of that is to improve the facility and have a separate women's facility, which is a logistical problem at Hotspur Way at the moment, although I think the team are training there much more, certainly Alex Morgan when she came into the club. for a short period of time at the end of last season, made a real difference in persuading the football club to treat the women much more equitably than the men. I can't see any other infrastructure purchases that the club will need to make in the next 5-10 years. So from that point of view, I think that level of expenditure has gone. There will be some money coming, hopefully, on stream from not just, the more regular attendances, 50, 60,000 fans attending football matches, but also from other deals, the property deals that are coming through, and assuming that money does feed into the key for players, whether it be through fees, transfer fees, or through salaries. I think that will change. I think we've got to try and be patient, which is very difficult for a modern day football fan,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really great that we know that we are we're really soundly managed, and we all know, we've seen it at Spurs. We've watched other clubs really struggle financially. So, we are, we're proud of the fact that we are well managed, and that we weren't, in trouble during the pandemic, and that we reached out to our community and we used the stadium for maternity services and all of those things. But ultimately, as you said, HG, we want to see that it makes a difference on the pitch, and that would be something we would obviously want an answer from the club. Is, do they feel that way too? And what would they want to say to supporters to reassure them? Because there is certainly a perception that isn't the case.
Okay, HG, your question, mate.
I don't have another question. That was. I just wanted to get the fans' perspective across, because obviously there are some who are much angrier than maybe I am, because they do spend the money, I don't, and it's inferior product, using that phrase. But when people are expected to pay as much and look into a long-term project of buying youngsters who I agree with everything. I think they will. I'm excited by who we bought in the summer, and obviously with COVID and the internationals, they haven't had a chance to gel yet. But it is very much a concern, and I say that because as someone who does money, and that it's maybe not as pressing to me, but I wanted that to come out in the show tonight, because for a lot of people it is the important thing, as Rachel said herself.
Yeah.
Bren?
Just quickly on the subject of impatient fans, there've been sort of some half-hearted protests at the Villa game and in the NFL. One question that came in for you guys, I'll go to you, Rachel. Is there a point where the trust would consider supporting a protest or coordinating a protest? Is there a line that the club needs to cross, or is it really just not part of the strategy overall?
I mean, I think I absolutely understand people's anger, and I can assure you, I feel angry and depressed at times, not just about on-field performance, but just the way I feel about my club, and the embarrassment when I'm got friends who've never shown any interest in football until suddenly Spurs do something really embarrassing and everyone wants to talk to me about it. But we're trying to achieve lasting change, and I think there is a place for protests, and I absolutely support everyone's freedom of speech, so long as it's within a certain code, and everyone's right to protest. But this certainly isn't the time, I don't think, for the trust to be organising demonstrations. We've taken what we consider to be a pragmatic approach. We're going to be meeting with our members to really talk about the next steps. This is certainly not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end of the beginning, or the beginning of the end, or whatever Churchill said. We don't think that shouting at Daniel Levy is going to achieve anything. Certainly not from the trust. If people want to have demonstrations, that is absolutely their right, and all power to them. But it's not something that we would be looking at the moment from the trust. We don't think that's the way to achieve things. We have a strategy. We are going to be consulting our members about what the next part of that would be, but it's unlikely to involve demonstrations. We hope it will be more effective.
Yeah, I think as always, you can gauge from Twitter that there is disquiet, but until that disquiet really impinges upon a vast majority of our membership who are calling for ENIC out, then we're not really going to be in that ball game, I don't think.
Well, also, shouting for ENIC out, what does that mean? Look at what's happened in Newcastle. I'm sure everybody's thrilled to have seen the back of Mike Ashley, which is a very different situation, I think. It's almost the polar opposite, Mike Ashley and Newcastle and Daniel Levy at Tottenham. But, we can't shout for ENIC out when there is no other option on the table. And who knows what we would be calling for if ENIC suddenly leave. You've got to have a buyer. You've got to have somebody else. It's got someone better. So ENIC out isn't a viable slogan at the moment or route. It's about changing the way the club is led for the better.
Yeah, that's very true. I think a lot of the arguments are quite fragmented as well, and to leave you out means something different to some. I think people, like you said, what's the alternative? And there may not be, but their point may not be that they want an alternative. It would be out with Levy's ways, out with his lying to the trust, out with his transfer policy, out with this. So I think perhaps the ENIC out, it's united people, but it was still quite fragmented in terms of an overall message. You mentioned about Newcastle, and we're going to get onto the game on the weekend and sort of general chat about Spurs, about the football. The trust is part of the FSA. Have they come out with a statement regarding the takeover of Newcastle yet?
Yeah, they have. Actually, it already feels a little bit out of date because their statement, well, I mean, it's a good statement in that it's basically quite nuanced. It recognises that, as I just said, that the Newcastle fans would be relieved, but they would have had no role whatsoever in choosing who owns them. And that maybe one of the questions that should be asked is, why is football becoming the vehicle for organisations and regimes to sports wash? I mean, already we're seeing people selling masks of people in dressed as Arab sheikhs, and this is all sort of normalizing behavior and regimes that are desperate for this sort of great publicity. So they are very concerned. They're looking at the ownership, the director of an ownership test, I think it's called, and sort of working with Football Supporters Europe and the Premier League to see, is it possible to get morality and human rights included into that? Should it be? Yes, definitely, they say. Is it going to be easy to word something that would go into that? No, because it is so nuanced. And how would you hold it up in a court of law if it was needed? And also, would it be able to be applied retrospectively? Who knows? So they have concerns. They quote Alan Shearer and his views, but I noticed that Alan Shearer, I think I'm right in saying, is now involved. He's got a role at Newcastle, so I guess his views might have changed slightly. But the main thing is, fans have no say, of course, and no choice, and this is what I worry about with Spurs.
Yeah, so it is so difficult to actually who is the moral arbiter of. We know or we understand that the Saudi regime murdered the journalist, which is a horrendous story. And then for Amanda Staveley, a spokesman for the consortium, to say, but this is at arm's length. This isn't the Saudi regime. This is the finances of the Saudi regime. therefore there is a separation. I find that very difficult to take. So the difficulty is how, as Rachel said, could you actually define what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and actually have the power at law to be able to make those decisions? Because it is inevitable that if the Premier League did continue with the we don't think you're fit and proper to run and own that club, that they would be challenged throughout the courts. Now, whether that is the Premier League bowing down because they know that they could not compete with the sovereign wealth fund, I don't know. It's dressed up with this. We've now come to the arrangement about the broadcasting rights and the issues that they were causing for the Premier League, and therefore it's all okay. It's I don't know. We're from I mentioned earlier, in the days of the Richardsons in 1969 at Tottenham and Sydney Whale as the owners, local businessmen and good people. Times have changed a little. It's certainly not the game that I started to get involved in even 5, 6, 7 years ago. And who knows? There was a newspaper I don't know how spurious it was, in one of the Sunderland newspapers, about the fact that Tottenham had approached, or we were in discussions with, the Saudi financial or the wealth fund for a purchase at 2.5 billion 2 years ago, I think it was. I don't know how true that is. I suspect it might be a little bit spurious, but even so, how would I have felt if the Saudis were now the owner of my football club? Would I still go? I don't know. It's a very difficult question, to ditch the habit of a lifetime. So I can understand the Newcastle fans' reaction to it, and it's going to be, I think, in the words of, I think one of our chairs said, it's going to be a circus on Sunday. You're going to see people, sort of dressed up to the nines, in support of it, and it's going to be very, very passionate. I mean, the Geordie crowd is always passionate, but it's going to be even more passionate on Sunday. And I must admit, I'm looking forward to going, but just for the sheer hell of it,
Well, let's move on and talk about that game and the season so far. So we currently sit 8th in the league, although above Arsenal, West Ham, 12 points, 1-4, lost 3. Rachel, how would you rate the season so far?
I think it's been a roller coaster, but not a really very enjoyable roller coaster. Certainly not a roller coaster that I'd want to go on at any funfair, because the ups were only like 1-0 each time and really cautious, and then the downs are so down, absolutely dreadful, sort of.
Just like Nemesis at Alton Towers. Oblivion. So
there were moments. Like obviously, the Man City game was fantastic, and really, what a way to start the season. And we all thought it's going to be brilliant, and Nuno is the answer, and everything else. And then, oh my God, the Palace game, and just so awful. But as Spurs often do, I think the Aston Villa game was about as good as it gets, and we could have won it by far more. It felt extremely united. The Paratici interview, where I love the fact that he was talking about fans and how we've all got to stay together. I thought, yeah, right back at you, mate. But the fans really were behind the team. It was such a fantastic atmosphere. You could feel the team. This meant everything to them. And actually, my favourite moment probably of the season, because I just think watching Skip this season, I've just absolutely loved. He's been the highlight for me. Just watching the difference that he makes and his attitude and how proper Spurs he is. I love him. But the last 5 minutes of the Villa game was played out really almost entirely in front of me. I was sitting there just loving it. I could see their faces, Højbjerg, Lo Celso, and my favourite, of course, Sonny. That last 5 minutes, there was no way they were going to let that ball get out of that little corner. They played it brilliantly. I could see their expressions, the nods and eye contacts they were making. It was a masterclass in shithousery, basically, and not imploding at the end of a match. And I just thought, you know, this is what I'm taking away with me from this. This is, if we can channel that energy and that discipline and enthusiasm, we're going to be okay.
You go, Bren.
Same for Pete. Pete, what's your thoughts on the season so far?
Not a lot more to add than what Rachel has said, but yeah, I see some optimism there. I think even in the Villa game, I think there was still some issues with that midfield that didn't quite tick. But we got 3 points in the end, which was so important. And in a way, it's again disappointing that we've had an international break. You know, if you recall the first international break, we won 3 out of 3 and we were flying high, and then came crashing down to earth at Palace. I'd like to hope that the same doesn't happen on Sunday. You know, having had the boost of those 3 points against Villa. I don't know. I think it's going to be a season of ups and downs. I can't see this team suddenly clicking. I think there are some pieces of the jigsaw that still need to be worked out. Where does Lo Celso play? I mean, he played superbly for Argentina the other night. I don't think we've seen the best of him, and we certainly haven't seen the best of Ndombele. I think it's going to be a tough season. I'd be amazed if we finish top 6. As for Sunday, I think the emotion is going to be probably will help us more, because I think the Newcastle boys will be playing for their careers. And I think they will feel probably a lot more pressure than we will going up there. And I fancy us to nick a win, strange as that may sound.
What have you made of Nuno so far, Pete? I mean, we all know he wasn't first choice. And it was a circus, to use that phrase again, the managerial chase. But what do you make of him, both in terms of his demeanour in press conferences and on the touchline, and also the football that we're playing?
I think Ali Gould's having fun with him. I say that, yeah. It was always interesting. Oh, Alistair, why are you asking me? You know, all that sort of stuff. He's a different character to what we've experienced in the recent past. You know, with Poch and with Jose. For me, the jury's still out. I've some doubts about his technical nous. Maybe that's probably because of the players that he has and trying to work out what's best for them as individuals within the team structure. At the moment, I'm not sure. The one thing that does concern me is the message that would have gone out, giving him a 2-year contract, and it's almost like saying, "Well, you're here for a little while, mate, but you know, we'll get rid of you fairly quickly afterwards. You know, if things go horribly wrong." I don't think that instills a sense of consistency in the longer term to be able to rebuild the team that we know has to be rebuilt. But I'm with Rachel. I mean, I watch a lot of under-23 football. And Skip has always stood out for me over the past 4 or 5 years as a kid coming into that. When he was 17, you know, he looked well beyond a lot of the players he was coming up against. And there are 1 or 2 kids in, the current under-23 squad who are not ready yet. You've seen Dane Scarlett, sort of play. He's not quite ready, but he will be potentially a really good thing in the future. And there's a young kid as well, Dylan Marcandy, who is very, very good as well, amongst others in the under-23 side. So, the future is bright. The academy is still producing really good players. But, there's something missing in that team at the moment. I'm not quite sure what it is. I like Højbjerg. with his leadership skills that he's beginning to show. But yeah, something's missing. There's a link there that's not quite right.
I think the defence is looking better. There's glimmers of hope with the defence. I mean, it was so bad last year, and it changed every week pretty much. And I think we're starting to see a shape and some obvious people who have to start. I mean, Romero being one of them.
Yeah.
He looks fantastic. We watched him against forgotten who it was. The beginning with P.
Pacos Ferreira.
Pacos, yes, that's it. Thank you. And he looked fantastic then. He's clearly got to be right. He's got to be one of the first names on the sheet as far as I'm concerned. And Brian is going to be awesome. I love him. I love the fact that he plays the way he looks. He's Spurs, isn't he? He's just going to be fantastic.
Can I also say, Calder also plays the way he looks.
What? Elegant and skillful.
That's what I meant. Exactly.
Also, just to jump in, I think Romero looks very Spurs as well, because he is quality, but he's a walking yellow card as well.
He's got a red in him, hasn't he? Yeah, definitely.
He was very lucky Villa scored that goal, because had they not scored, that would have been a red straight away, his challenge in the build-up.
Oh, wow.
That's what I'm saying. A touch of the lamellas. HG?
I think the interesting thing, I mean, Pete talked about what happened at Palace after the last international break. I'm hopeful that, that Palace game was the first game of the weekend, the Saturday lunchtime, and the Newcastle one is Sunday afternoon. Hopefully those 36 hours will make a difference. Not just that, we don't have, 3 players sunning themselves in Croatia for 10 days. Apparently they can all come back and sun themselves in Newcastle for about 10 hours before the game. But it does mean that, hopefully the 3 of them would be at least available in the squad. I agree with Rachel. I want Romero to start. I really do. I think if the Celso is ready to do so, he probably deserves the start too. It may be a bit more that we'll be asking more of him to play in midfield after that plane journey. But with Romero at the back, I do think he just, despite not looking the biggest, he's quite a big guy, and he seems to stride across the pitch as if it's his. Which not often you see Spurs players do that, at least not in my memory. So I'm excited, and I think that Newcastle will be tough, but we have the ability to do something. I just don't want to see narrow strikers. I'd like to see wingers actually on the wing. I've said that on various pods that we do. Nothing's really changed there. Like, if we're going to have Skip and Højbjerg and Lo Celso as a kind of narrow 3. We don't need a narrow 3 ahead of them. I don't want the fullbacks to be forced to do all the attacking width. But like Newcastle, they might have all the money in the world, but they've still got the same 11 players. So like we let's hope we can go there and get a victory, because if West Ham can, surely we can, right?
Well, absolutely.
And will Harry Kane score?
If we get a penalty.
He's looked a bit off, hasn't he, Rachel? I saw it in there, wondering if you'd got some intel on why Harry Kane looks off. Not sure why you would know that, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely not, no. Yeah. But I mean, I kind of need him to win me back again, actually, because I'm so fed up with him. The way he behaved, I just can't feel it for him at the moment. I know my head tells me, he's a fantastic player. Of course, he'll start scoring again, but he just doesn't look right. Doesn't look as though he really wants to be there to me. And so not impressed.
I mean, we talked again about the Villa game being probably the best we've seen Spurs. We created a load of chances, should have scored more than we did. But I think a lot of that was we played on the front foot. Like, I remember I'm watching the game. Like, I don't like watching Spurs when games are open. Even if I think that we might score, my mind is thinking, no, we're not, and they will. And it felt like a basketball game at times. Like, the midfield just kind of was this big empty space, and we were going forward, and then they were going forward. But I did like the fact that we were trying to score. We weren't sitting back and hitting on the counter. And that's not home versus away. I just think in general, I want to see us. That's what we did when we were good. I think the best teams do that. We can think of one manager who has never done that and has been successful. But most of the time, if you have the ball and you're trying to score, you will probably score. You will probably win those games. I don't see that as anything newsworthy to report. But so I'm hopeful that we'll see something along those lines. Like Skip and Højbjerg are quite a defensive pair. But if Skip is playing, then Højbjerg has that license to go forward, and he does what he does for Denmark, and we know how good he is for them. So if we get the balance right, if we get people playing and there's a structure to the side, and we know that with Romero at the back we can rely on him, and Dyer, he's not the greatest defender, but we know that he is reliable. Like he's not going to do something too stupid too often. It's unfortunate because we compare everyone now to Vertonghen and Alderweireld, which is just harsh. Because they not only were they good individuals, but they played together for 10 years. I mean, you don't see that in football. But I'm hopeful that if we go there again, right attitude, the home fans are going to be at it for Newcastle. Spurs have shown this season that if we're not on it from the first whistle, then we might get steamrolled. But no, like if we're there and we really do take the fight to them and say, no, I don't care what day it is for you. We're going to make sure that you start on a downer. Then we have the quality to beat them. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say hold that thought. Rachel and Pete, I'm going to ask you your predictions for the Newcastle game. Let's go to you first, Pete. What's your forecast?
Narrow 2-1 win to us.
Good.
And Harry scores.
Everyone's we're all happy with that. And you have a jolly good time in Newcastle, by the way.
Thank you.
Rachel?
I think I probably agree with Pete. Actually, I think we will win. Yeah, and we will definitely concede. 3-1. 3-1. I'll go.
3-1. I'm loving that. A hat trick for Sonny.
Yeah, why not?
And you two cheeseheads, Brendan, what are you saying?
Oh, at first I agreed with Pete, and then I agreed with Rachel. So I'll stick with Rachel because it's 3-1. So yeah, I'll go 3-1. We will concede, but they don't really have that much. They got San Maximin.
Yeah,
that's about it. Callum Wilson is not a great striker. Oh, he's going to score now, isn't he? I'll stop there. 3-1.
Good man. HG.
Don't ask me. Don't ask me. Look, it's going to end up being like we always talk about West Ham, Spurs being their cup final. Sunday will be Newcastle's cup final. The players will want to do something. The fans will want to see something. I don't like this. So if I'm going to be positive, then I think it will be an entertaining draw where both sides can come away thinking, okay, like it wasn't so bad. 2-2.
I guess if Spurs lose, the pressure just comes back onto Nuno again, doesn't it? I mean, he's almost like a dead man walking, and we've played 5-6 games of the season. It's almost ridiculous, isn't it? But I'm going to be positive and say we're going to win 3-0. We're not going to concede. Wow. We're going to silence the Geordie party that is going to be going on up there, I'm sure, this weekend. Just want to thank you all really for joining me this evening. Rachel, always a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's been lovely. Thanks very much for having us.
Pete, lovely to see you, and thanks very much for joining us.
That's all right. My pleasure.
Bren, as ever, from Brazil with your samba drums in the background. I can't hear them really, honestly. Thanks very much.
Good, man. My kids are making all the noise now. Just quickly to Rachel and Pete before we go, can you let our listeners and viewers know how to get more involved with the trust, things like, and about your podcast as well?
Yes, absolutely. We'd love you to get involved. Come and join us at www.thstofficial.com. You can join us as a supporters club, whether you're in England or abroad. You can join us as a full member and have access to our forum and all sorts of other benefits, or as an associate member. Full membership is £10, associate membership is free. We really want you to get involved, and the more people we represent, obviously, the more powerful our voice. We do also do a podcast. It's as and when there's something that we want to share and explain. It's not it's basically a vehicle for us to explain things that people can't be bothered to read, and we're going to be doing one very soon. Let's just put it like that. But we've done them in the past on mental health issues, on governance, and all sorts of things. So they're all on our website.
Brilliant. And thanks for that. HG from Vienna. Thank you.
From Vienna. Yeah, I don't have any exciting music where I am. Sorry about that. A bit of Schlager. If you know what Schlager music is, I hope you don't know what Schlager music is. But yeah, Austria is good. I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Good.
And we've got a couple of live events coming up this week. So tomorrow night there is the Shan Show. Tune in for that. I believe her topic of conversation is: would you rather be owned by Enoch or the Sheikh? So that'll be an interesting one. And she will host that as ever with some special guests. And on Friday we've got our Newcastle preview. We're being joined by We Are Newcastle TV, I believe. If they've come down from their party yet. Let's spoil it for them on Sunday. And in the meantime, come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.